So this article is all about how sensory integration and social emotional interactions are supposed to be occurring together. And one of the things that's happened in the last 30 plus years in this, whether it happened with Floortime, moving away from its core concepts that made it effective, right? That we're talking about with some of the stuff like following the lead, or what we saw before Floortime was actually sensory integration, moving away from its core principles, making it less effective, is that gene errors, the biologist, psychologist, neurologist who are OT, sorry, who OT, and who popularized and created this entire field of sensory integration had principles that made it operational, right? Made it effective. One of those principles said that the experience should not be rigid. It should not be pre-planned by the therapist. It needs to adapt to the child's needs, and the therapist has to be continuously interacting and responding to the child's gestures and needs within the experience. And the child has to be a purposeful participant. They can't be sitting there passively. They have to be actively involved, right? Now, what this turns into is one of two extremes. We see things like astronaut training, which for adults may be effective, but for kids is yet I've yet to see it effective, where they just spin a child, where the person's sitting on a swing, kind of just more passively. And I'm not saying that's the entirety of the training for any of you who is an OT and understands these types of things. I'm going to mute you all for now, just while I'm kind of explaining this. But as you think about the experiences that rewire our brain, in one of the necessary conditions for neuroplasticity, active participation has been found to be one of the mandatory considerations for someone to actually begin to rewire and reorganize their nervous system around an experience, actually choosing to participate basically. So a child who's passively sitting there, they might be enjoying the spinning, but they're not really an active participant by being, they didn't choose to come, to drive there that day. They're not aware of why they're sitting fully in the therapist's office. They're not like an adult being in the same way. So it's not the same purpose. So we're going to get a child to be purposeful in other ways. We're going to have them participate in the activity itself. That makes them purposeful. By shaking the ropes, indicating another push on the swing, now they're being purposeful. But they're also interacting. They're also connecting. They're also communicating. They're doing all of the things that are necessities in order to reorganize these parts of our nervous system. And why is it so important that the child be purposeful and interactive with a therapist who's adaptive and not rigid and not directive? Because when we are integrating these systems, we're not just using our sensory cortex, right? Our sensory cortex has each of these systems already in place in our wiring, and we're trying to build wiring between them. But it doesn't just happen between the areas of sensory input. It happens between the areas of sensory input and emotional perception at the same time. So when I have an experience, well, I hear my dog chewing on his bone right now. Okay, so I'm hearing something, and I can interact and I can understand what the meaning of that is, and I can feel safe and secure to know he's not chewing on something he shouldn't chew. So I'm positively, experiencing this sound because I know he's chewing on the right thing, not the wrong thing. Right? But if I heard a harder clicking or something, I'd be nervous, right? So immediately a sound can elicit two different emotional responses. And that gives me meaning. That helps me organize and understand what I'm experiencing. Without that emotional context, I don't know what I'm experiencing. Thus, I'm more likely to be disorganized or upset by it or uncertain about it. So we know that these systems work together. I just read an amazing article about the cerebellum, actually, and how the cerebellum is an active participant in our integration of information. And actually, the cerebellum is responsible for for some even parts of our executive function, planning ahead and integrating all these different resources of sensory and emotional information and leading to adaptive behavior. So all these systems have to work together. It's not just about stimulating the visual, the auditory, the vestibular, the proprioceptive, the tactile, getting these systems to work together because I'm playing with rice and beans or shaving cream in isolation. Then I'm just doing a sensory activity. But if I'm doing this with a person, we're putting shaving cream on our noses and touching each other's heads, and I'm tolerating the experience of the cream with an emotional connection and interacting with it, now I'm having what we call a fully integrated experience. And that's what Dr. Jean Ayres talked about in all of her original writing. How many therapists do that primarily with kids in OT or other SI programs? Very few, actually. Most of them still highlight the activity over the social experience. So, okay, that's kind of a little rundown, but yeah, Sylvia, you want to say something? I can't, sorry, I can't hear you yet. Sylvia.
Sorry.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that as a parent, for me, when I first learned about Gestalt learning,
Yeah.
I think this was also another thing that connects with the emotional context, because I didn't know why my son would be able to say certain words that came from a very emotionally powerful situation. He would always remember, and just to make me happy, or he wants the same happy reaction from me, he would say that specific word over and over, just so that he gets the same reactions from me. So I thought it was so interesting. Again, there had to be a nice social emotional context, which was me being so happy for him to be able to say that word, and him being happy because I understood what he said.
Yeah, exactly. But your response gave that word meaning, right?
Yeah,
That word,
it became
whether
so much more.
the word could have been fish, right? But he knows when he says fish, mommy smiles and laughs. Well, now
Yeah.
fish is a joke, right? It's not necessarily food yet, but that's the meaning of it to him.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful, right? But
Yeah.
what you're identifying, Sylvie, is actually how our brain stores information. We developmental theorists have determined that we go through a process called dual coding, right? So every experience we have has a physical and an emotional kind of folder heading, if you will, right? Think about your brain as filing away all this information. Well, every experience gets a tab on that folder for its physical and an emotional kind of perception. Now, I hear a loud noise. It could be a siren, and I get nervous or worried or aggravated and cover my ears. Or I could hear the same loudness of a noise, but it's my favorite band. And I turn and I smile and I start dancing, right? And so our emotional perception of the experience is what gives it meaning. And this was the concept that drove the creation of Floortime when my father started it. Because he was saying it was our emotional perceptions and experience in the world that drive our development further. So, yeah.
I think it's amazing. I think this was the thing that made me realize that we are on the right track, and now there is science behind it. This I think it's so beautiful, emotional and social context to be the part of it.
Yeah, my father used to call it sensory affect motor integration, right? Because a lot of people call it sensory integration, but really, even with the sensory system, you're integrating your motor system. Almost every sensory activity will involve some sort of motor use and integration. But the key ingredient to all of this, and Jean Ayres used to say this, is the emotion kind of pulls all together. My father used to say the emotion is the glue, right? It's the glue that pulls these systems together. And that's what they're finding more and more of. The brain as this kind of interconnected spider's web, right? We have the sensory cortex that sits up here, and we have these different areas that may not be communicating as readily, but it's actually the other areas of our brain, our amygdala, our cerebellum, these other emotional centers of our brain that are actually wiring to these physical centers. And now we have the connections, because now all these different, the visual and the auditory, come together in that emotional center of the brain, and that's really what's pulling together. So just, is there anybody who has a disagreement or a concern about this, or other thoughts about this from a sensory perspective? Sylvia wins the gold star today for participation, by the way. Thank you, Sylvia. You all are on notice. But is there any other thoughts about this? Because one of the reasons I write these articles is because whether it be in our office or parents we're talking to who are going to other clinics or professionals I'm talking to, these concepts are not universally accepted. Everybody agrees with them in theory when we talk about them, but in practice, in application, they rarely get integrated because they're harder to apply. Okay, it's always harder to play with a child than let a child play. Right? It's always harder to be actively involved in physical. And we literally have had therapists in the past, and I'm going to restrain myself in a way from saying what I really want to say. who chose not to do these things and would come up with their own rationale and arguments not to do it. Now, I have my own feelings as to why and what was going on with those steps, but it didn't have to do with the actual concept. It had to do with them just not wanting to put the energy in at times. I know that for a fact because we'd see them do it and they'd see how it worked and they'd know it worked for certain kids. But then other kids it was harder to do with, they wouldn't always do it. And so, and they'd make a rationale. Well, this child needs to do this on their own because that's their lead. And I said, well, if they're doing this on their own, if they're running back and forth and tapping a spoon on their hand over and over, and that they need to do that, well, what if we became part of it? What if we start chasing them and becoming the monster or something? And every time we did it, this boy would light up and look behind us and smile. And no longer was it about tapping the spoon, it was about chase. And soon enough, every time he was doing that and he saw me or someone who did that with him, he didn't want the spoon on his own to tap. He wanted you to chase him. Because guess what was more rewarding, more regulating than running and tapping the spoon in isolation? Doing it with a friend, right? Just like sitting and having coffee by yourself can sometimes be nice and calming, and we need that. But also having coffee with a friend can really be rewarding in a different way, right? It can give us an opportunity to get stuff off our chest, feel heard and acknowledged, feel rewarded in a completely different way. So we need to think about kind of these experiences and how the emotional side of it is really going to be the part that causes the long-term shift in the wiring, right? Because when I learned to regulate myself as a young child or as an adult, and I have to remind myself of this sometimes as an adult too, because we all get stuck in our habits and sometimes they are antisocial. We need people. Every single human being on this planet, autistic or not, benefits from relationships. And people without relationships, autistic or not, have higher incidence of mental health disorders and behavioral disorders. Period. I mean, it is black and white research, right? And so if we know that we all need relationships, we can't force them on people, but we need to find ways to connect an individual with these other with people who know how to adjust to them and create manageable relationships and meaningful ones. Any other thoughts?
I'd like to add in just a little bit.
Yeah.
As an occupational therapist, I think, Jake, at St. David's Center, this has been natural for us from an OT perspective. And personally, I've learned greatly from the work we've done with you. I also think, I understand your experiences that most OTs don't do this naturally, do more directing. And I think I have tons of hope because the OTs I've trained with, and even a current one, Tracy Stackhouse out of Colorado, she talks about sensory affective motor.
Oh, great.
Her system for assessing a child really looks at that affective state as one of the primary. And she includes a lot of the foundation work that you're talking about.
Wonderful.
So I would just say that there is hope. There are a lot of people in the world, a lot of OTs in the world who are doing this kind of work, following Jean Ayres at more of the basic foundation level. And her work it's got to be meaningful and purposeful for the child. The child has to give the adaptive response to the just right challenge, which it's so complementary, as you know, as your dad knew. It's just completely complementary.
Thank you for sharing that, Kate. And Kate, as you know, I can be a little extreme or binary sometimes in my expressions. But so I appreciate your texture you're providing here, and you're right. There are wonderful OTs out there who are already doing this, and I also found in the last few years, especially, the OT community is moving more in this direction as a whole. I think they're moving, or I should say, back in this direction. I think there was a period of time they moved away from it, and now they're moving back towards it because I think they see what we're talking about today. That we missed the boat for a little while. Now we need to get back on it. But yeah, thank you for sharing that, Kate. And you're right. I mean, I think it's a necessity, and I see some wonderful people out there. And we actually just brought in a new wonderful OT ourselves, and at the Floortime Center, and we've already talked about all this stuff, so she's on board. So that's nice.
I just want the parents and professionals on the call to know that there are really great OTs out
Yeah,
there.
there are, and certainly you all at
will
St.
embrace
David's,
this work.
and certainly you all at St. David's are kind of a special group as well. So I know that. Thank you for saying that, and contributing as well. Any other thoughts or questions? We can wrap up in just a second here. And another nice lively discussion today. Thank you all for such great contributions. And Sylvia, like I said, you get the gold star. But yeah, and also Sylvia, if you want to email me after this, maybe chat a little bit more about doing a little detective work and figuring what the goals are. I'm happy to help. Just let me know. And when we can chat, we'll figure it out together. Okay, I can either give you resources or we'll just talk it through. All right. Yeah, it's my pleasure. Will you all then have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, or get some rest, and I will see you all in 2 weeks. And like I said, just a reminder, these are being recorded. My plan is from now on is to break each of these videos up into the 2 segments for each one article and post these separately on our website, and so that you all could watch this if you want to share it with someone else, things like that. And now it will be visible via YouTube as well. We have a YouTube channel for Greenspan Floortime. So again, if any of you have concerns about this, about being on it, being heard on it, please let me know, and I can either try to find a way to block out some of your contributions, or something else. But let me know that you're concerned about that. If you are. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Take care. Bye-bye.